Hey, it's Chris, the Supply Chain Doctor. Over the years, I've interviewed some of the brightest minds and successful leaders in supply chain management. In May 2020, I sat down with supply chain leader Ken Ackerman to learn more about him and collect a little supply chain management history. After the interview, Ken told me about a similar interview he had with Dr. Jim Stock many years prior, and the related work Dr. Stock did. In November 2020, I was able to catch up with Dr. Stock to learn about him and his work. As an academic in the world of transportation, logistics, and what we now call supply chain management, Jim was well connected to many of the original academic thought leaders in the space. Jim did interviews with many of these thought leaders and shared them with me. The list includes Ken Ackerman, Don Bowersox, James Haskett, Bud Lalonde, John Langley Jr., Tom Menser, Tom Spee, and Daniel Wren. To carry on the great work started by Dr. Jim Stock, I'm dusting off these interviews and bringing them to you to help you get a better understanding of supply chain management and hopefully become a more effective supply chain professional.
I really feel we've accomplished a lot in 40 years, but there's still a lot left to do. We have this term supply chain, which is like having a tiger by the tail, because my feeling was, maybe this is a little bit inaccurate, but I didn't feel that the term logistics turned on a lot of people besides people in logistics. I know it was always a term we always talk about, how difficult it is to explain to your next door neighbor or someone at a cocktail party what you do for a living if it's logistics. They just, their eyes glaze over pretty quickly. But the term supply chain is more inclusive, and I think it gives us an opportunity to not to tell people how important logistics and supply chain is, but to put it in the proper context in terms of the relevance and how an adherence to the principles of those two terms can help better manage our organizations, better manage our businesses, and so forth. The part of the challenge, I think, is it's a term and it's a concept, supply chain, which is appealing to a lot of people, and so different people tend to drag those words into directions that kind of fit what they're doing. So we've seen people from other disciplines that over the past 10 years have discovered supply chain, and so, but I don't think that it's limited to an extension of logistics. Period. It's a pretty multifaceted concept. So the direction that takes in the future, but I think that the fact that it's on the table, it's being talked about, it's something that people accept the terminology. Probably over time, if we can continue to steer it in the right direction, we can get a lot more mileage out of a pretty good concept.
You mentioned people from other areas coming in because supply chain is broader. Who should set that direction? Should it be logistics people, or should it be people from other areas that are part of supply chain management?
I don't think there's a perfect answer to that question, because I think we all have our stake in, I'm a product of my background, and my background's in logistics. And so as much as I might like to tell you that I'm fully understanding of all the other disciplines, I'm probably down deep a little bit more biased toward logistics. So maybe what the answer to that is some kind of a collaboration between people who have diverse backgrounds, who are willing to try to be open-minded and figure out what's the best kind of direction for this. One of the things we've been through, time after time is the role of manufacturing and so forth. And I believe there's great scientific aspects of manufacturing technology, things I could never do, manufacturing technology. But I didn't say that extended to whether or not a company should manufacture for itself or use outsource or contract or co-pack or other alternatives. And there are still industries today where manufacturing is done by some of the organizations internally because that's the way they've always done it. And I don't think that I think it's more useful to look at the alternatives and consider manufacturing part of supply chain. So I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there, but I do think that there's still some time-honored ways of doing things that I don't have any problem with the company manufacturing for itself as long as it does its own analysis and figures out that's the best way to do things. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right answer as much as it used to be. So,
do you think there'll ever be theory in supply chain management?
Yes, I do. Or I think there should be. And part of the reason for saying that, I had the great privilege at the University of Tennessee, the last Ph.D. course that I taught for about 5 or 6 years before I left the faculty there was on logistics, history of logistics thought. And we talked about that. We talked about, should there be a theory of logistics and so forth. But we started that course by going back to the earliest origins, and not the earliest, but the 1950s and 60s writings of key people, among which you've interviewed. But people who were the founders of this discipline, if you will. And I think we're at a point now where we need to be creating a better conceptual understanding of what it is and so forth, because I'm not a scientist on this topic, but I think that, for a discipline to be recognized, you've got to have some theoretical, conceptual underpinnings of exactly what it is, and then you build up. I'm a big believer in, although I'm not a theoretician, I'm a big believer that if you've got a theory or a model that represents what you're talking about, that you can then add the details onto that. But if you try to add, it's like executing without a plan. If you've got the plan, you can execute. And sometimes if you execute without a plan, it seems to work, but you're just probably lucky. So maybe this is the right time in the history of supply chain management, I'll call it that, to consider more of a theoretical kind of a theory of logistics, theory of supply chain management.
Do you think we'll do that if we don't have if you will, a consensus definition of what supply chain management is?
Well, that's a
there are lots of different definitions.
Yeah. Well, I just go off on a little tangent for a moment here, but my key area of research interest is in outsourcing of logistics services. And so terms like 3PL, 4PL, LLP, lead logistics provider, all these different terms come up and so forth. And when I have the occasion to do so, I don't apologize for it, but I tell people that there are a number of ways of referring to the topic of outsourced logistics services, and I could provide a precise definition for each one of them. Not a definition that everyone would agree to for each one of them, but then I also say that I tend to use the words interchangeably at times, which may seem to be heresy for some people. But then my final comment is that, but when someone tells me they're using a 3PL or a 4PL, my first question to them will be to please tell me how you define that so I can understand. And quite honestly, the last thing I want to do is argue with someone over their definitions, because if that's the way they view things, that's the way they view it. And the most important thing is for me to understand what it is they're talking about, and then we can continue our discussion on a one-to-one basis.
As you look back at this 40-plus year career, do you have any regrets?
I don't have any regrets at all. Whatever the opposite of a regret is, I guess things you would be appreciative of is, and I've used the term right place, right time, but I have been fortunate. I've enjoyed good health. I've enjoyed the chance to work with, I've worked with good people everywhere. People that might not even think that I think of them as good people, but I've really enjoyed everyone I've had a chance to work with. But I've also been in the company of those that have, when I've asked for advice, I've gotten good advice, and it has never misled me. And I've really enjoyed everything I've ever done.
Are there any things you would like to have done but have not had time to do, perhaps?
It's my answer to that question would probably be no as yes, and it would be for the following reason, and that is that my academic activities have a place in my life, but that's not the only thing that has has a place for me. I've got a high regard for my family life. I tend to travel a lot, just based on what I do. I travel a lot, and but I'm actually to the point in life where any trip I would take for business reasons, I would hope would be pretty essential kind of a trip, because I would rather spend a day at home than a day anywhere else in the world if I have the choice. And the third part is, I enjoy recreational activities, so forth, and there's a place in my life for that. I've always thought that there might be fun to get to a point in life when you could play golf every day if you wanted to, but I've decided that wouldn't make it as much fun if you could do it all the time. So it's something I enjoy on weekends. But I do have a set of friends that I play golf with, and a set of friends I play hockey with, and those are the academic, the family, and then the social with friends and peers of mine are of all of equal importance to me.
Okay. Who do you think has had the biggest influence on your career? Could be a business person, could be an academic, could be anyone.
Would you like me to name someone, or just
name a person, or maybe a few?
I would. I guess the people that have had the greatest impact on me are people who are very good at what they do, are very good at working with and coaching other people. Not in an active way where somebody would say, yeah, he's my coach, but people who just know how to deal effectively with other people, how to help people, when they might need a little help without making them feel like you're being pushed into anything. I would say people like John Coyle here at Penn State is a good example of someone. There was another professor at the University of Tennessee who, because I know one of the questions that you had, we talked a little bit about earlier, was mentors and so forth. And I've never had a mentor in the sense of I've never talked with anyone about agreeing to be my mentor. That's not. But and so my own take on that is, but Professor Joe Fry at the University of Tennessee is someone who was definitely a mentor to me, and I never told him that, but I knew it. And the reason he was a mentor was because he was very good at what he did. He was a railroad man, trucking man. In a legal proceeding, you'd never want to put him on the witness stand because he'd tear you apart. He knew so much about it. But anyway, he lived by a set of principles, and always had a good word to say about everyone. And, I look up to people like that. And I learned so much from being around him. He's not with us any longer, but just for the years at Tennessee when I had a chance to be around him, just you pick up little things here and there. That's how Joe Fry would have done it, so forth. So those are a couple of people that have really made. And of course, I talked at length about my father earlier.
Right. You mentioned Joe Fry, his sort of personal code of conduct, or what have you. Do you have one that drives you, or that focuses you, your worldview, or some conduct code that you follow?
Yeah, I guess I do. I like to try to treat people as I'd like to have them treat me. I'm human. I'm not so sure I succeed all the time with that. If somebody asks me to do something, I like to, if I can do it, I like to be able to help. If I can't do it, I like to be able to let them know I can't do it. And so that's kind of something I try to live by. Again, not perfect, doesn't work all the time, but to the extent possible, I try to be as considerate of other people as I can.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the importance of balance in work, family, and so forth. Tell us a little about your family. You're married to Ann. How did you meet?
Well,
what were the circumstances? And
circumstances were that I was a young assistant professor at the University of Tennessee, and I had moved into a brand new apartment complex, and a lot of my neighbors were students and so forth. And a recent graduate of the University of Tennessee, who became my wife, was advised by one of my neighbors to, and she was in the insurance business at the time. She'd gotten her undergraduate degree in education, and she was working for an insurance company. And they said, well, you should go talk to John. He's a young professor. He might want to buy some insurance. And so I got a knock on my door early one evening, and she introduced herself, and I invited her in, and as she tells the story, she said, you invited me in and you asked me if you were eating pizza and having a beer, and would I like to join you? So she joined me, and that's how we met, and we're married several months later. It wasn't a very, I guess you'd say courtship, whatever you'd call that, but we didn't know each other for more than several months, and at which point we were married, and we've been married for let's do the math on this, but about 38 years in this coming September. So,
did you buy any insurance?
Yes, I did.
Oh.
And I can't tell you the details, but I got and I still have it, a very interesting letter from my new insurance agent about the benefits of having her as my agent and me as the client. So I'll leave it very general.
Okay. Now, do you have children?
We do. We have two children. We have a daughter, Sarah, who's 34 years old. She lives in Charlotte with her husband and their young 2.5-year-old grandson. That was our first grandson. She's in the executive benefits. She's in the consulting business now. She's been in executive benefits and CPA accountant and so forth for a while, but now she's working for a Charlotte-based consulting firm. My son lives in Nashville. He's 32. He works for Osborne Hesse Logistics, which is a major logistics provider. And interesting, Dad never told him to go into logistics. If he had asked me, I would have told him that would be a good decision, but he made it on his own. He's worked for a few logistics companies and had nice tenure at each company, but he lives in Nashville with his wife and their daughter, 9-month-old granddaughter. So I've got one grandson and one granddaughter.
Okay. So as a parent, what was your main goal? What did you try to instill in your children?
Well, we were very fortunate. Just like I was fortunate to go to schools that were all pretty good, we were fortunate to have had two children that were, my wife is the one that ended up taking care of them because I was traveling so much and so forth. So I'm going to be careful because she'll watch this tape. But we were very fortunate that our children were, for the most part, highly directed in terms of what they did. They're both very good students. They both stayed out of trouble, although anybody who's been a parent knows that you dodge a lot of bullets, and we came out on the high side of that. We were very fortunate, and they both went to school at Wake Forest. My daughter, the older one, she and my wife did all the due diligence in terms of where to go to school, and my son piggybacked on the existing base of information, and he decided to go to Wake Forest too. So, yeah, he sometimes calls himself the energy efficient man. So that's one way in which he was efficient there. I've been asked from time to time why didn't my kids go to the University of Tennessee, and which would have been a perfectly good place for them to go to the university. But my wife and I had both gone away to school, and we placed a value on that. And I've been in Knoxville, Tennessee for almost 40 years, and I see some. I know one lawyer who, in particular, grew up in Knoxville, went to the University of Tennessee, then he went to the University of Tennessee Law School, but then he purposely moved to Memphis for a number of years and moved back just to change the scenery. He said people that don't ever move anywhere, it's just, if you have a choice to move somewhere, it's probably a good idea. So we've got one in Charlotte, one in Nashville now.
Okay. How do you think you influenced your children the most?
I probably influenced them the most, not by anything I ever said to them. Of course, parents always say things to kids, and it's like dealing with students at times. You got to understand sometimes you're connecting and sometimes you're not. But I think the way I influenced them the most is probably by the way I did things. As I've already talked about, I'm a planner, and understand where you want to go and so forth. And they saw me doing things like that. It's funny when you see your kids grow up, how much you observe about them. It's not too hard to figure out why they do things certain ways, because they picked up a lot from my wife. Picked up a lot. My wife's a lot smarter than I am. I'll get some points from that later. But she is, and she's probably the most thoughtful person I've ever met in my entire life, and just a wonderful mother to the kids. And so they both turned out just great.
How do you think, if I had your children here, how would they describe you as a parent?
They'd probably describe me as maybe too directed, too focused, intent. I know what I want to do, and I do it. My daughter's very much the same way I am, I think, about things. She knows what she wants to do, and she's very focused and certain. So they're both successful. My son is a little bit more, I'll call him laid back, but don't read too much into that term laid back. He's a real serious kid when the situation requires so.
Mm-hmm. How do you think your parents influenced you the most?
I think they influenced me by not only what they did, but what they said. I mean, I remember them telling me things, the right way to do things, and I listened. I didn't always do it the way they said, but I remembered what they said, and they never gave me any bad advice. Great parents to have, so forth. Neither of them are with me anymore, but still, it's just. And they knew how to deal with me, because I wasn't always the easiest person to deal with. But again, nothing, no trouble types of things, just little annoyances here and there that came up.
So do you think you're more like your father or mother?
Ooh, that's tough. I think probably a mixture of both. I've got some characteristics of both of them. So.
Okay. Now, you think, in your family, do you have brothers, sisters, and are they in similar positions as you are, or what professions are they in?
Yeah, I've got a sister who lives in Philadelphia. Now, she has lived in Philadelphia her entire life, native Philadelphian. If you talk to her, you'd pick her out of a crowd because of her Philadelphia accent. And she and her husband have lived, they're both from the local area there, and they both lived in the Doylestown community north of Philadelphia for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And my other sister is living in Huntersville, North Carolina, and her husband is he's former chief of police of an Ohio police department, and he retired from there. Now he's down in NASCAR country in Huntersville, where he's the chief, and he's so my sister is married. They both have nice families and doing very well.
NASCAR country.
Yes.
Just had Daytona 500 yesterday.
I know. I stayed up too late watching the end of it.
You saw all the crashes
And the fire.
So
we'll date ourselves with this.
There you go. Let's shift gears almost completely and look at some questions. They're probably not relevant for your academic career, but are just interesting insights into people. One is, if you could live in some historical era other than now, which one would it be?
Ooh, okay, because you provided me with some of the questions ahead of time, and it didn't say other than now. So if I could live in some historical era other than now, let's say I think maybe the early 1900s, and I'm not exactly sure why I would say that, except to say that the world was reasonably well developed by then. We had the advent of the automobile in the early 1900s, so there was innovation, there was excitement, we had a big war, obviously, and so forth. But that might have been an interesting. I'll answer the question the way I also read it, and that is, I probably picked. I think we've lived in some of the best years that we've ever experienced. I mean, I can't imagine anything that could have been better than being a baby boomer and growing up in the 50s and the 60s. The way life was back in those days bears no resemblance to what it's like right now. Everything evolves and so forth. And I think some of the challenges that are being faced longer term, quite honestly, I feel bad for my children because I don't think they'll have the privilege of living in, they won't be living in the same world I lived in because they're younger than I am. But I think the circumstances and the situations and so forth that we've lived through in the past 50, 60 years have been, really good to live through, and I'm just not so sure what the future holds. But again, to try to be positive about it, there's so much innovation. Once we work our way through things like technology-based societies, and it's not hard to understand why a lot of manufacturing has moved offshore and so forth. And when you move activity-based functions offshore, that displaces people from their jobs, and so we're dealing with need to create jobs and so forth. But long term, we'll probably figure out a way to do that makes some of the progress we're looking for. It's just kind of hard to see at any point in time how to do that.
Now, if you could be anybody in history, who would you be?
Well, maybe from an academic, I feel like I need to have a pretty profound, like Einstein or
not
or
necessarily.
But I might say Steve Jobs, although I've read enough divergent commentaries on Steve Jobs. There's a lot about him that I admire, and there's a lot that I don't admire, if what I read is true. But I think if I could be anyone, I would probably like to be a prominent professional athlete. Probably a hockey star like a Bobby Orr or a Gordie Howe or somebody like that. I'm attracted to those kinds of things. I enjoy sports, so forth. Part owner of a minor league hockey team that I have a great interest and involvement with, and so I get to see some of that going on. And I think it's just an interesting thing to do. But I'm sure there are other people I would also enjoy stepping into the shoes of if I had a chance.
Now, if you could meet any historical figure of the past, who might it be?
I think, and I'm a little bit biased by living in the time frame in which I've been living and dealing with issues that are, important to people. But I think it would probably be Bill Clinton, former president of the United States. And the reason I say that is because I think, not to make a political comment, but I think in Clinton you've got a guy that had a pretty good grasp on the totality of what it is to try to manage a country and participate in a global kind of setting and so forth. And I think history will probably show that he made some pretty good decisions over time. And my political orientation is not the same as Bill Clinton's. What I'm saying is that I think if hindsight is of any value, I'd love to have him back for a few years. But at the time he was the president, I kind of wondered about it. But I think that that would be an interesting, person to get to know and so forth. And the other part of me saying that is I've met a couple of presidents. I met Ford, I think, and I met one other. But anyway, I think that if you had a chance to sit down and talk with Bill Clinton for 20 minutes, it would be a remarkable opportunity. And I'm not sure that I would say the same about every other president. I don't know.
What accomplishment, this could cut across academics, family, whatever, are you most proud of in your life?
I'm definitely most proud of having a meaningful, enjoyable family life. kids that grew up to be fine adults and have families of their own, and a wife that I couldn't have picked a better. Well, I already told you she picked me because she came, but no, seriously, I couldn't have picked a finer person to be married to for all these years. And I've been very fortunate. I mean, I just don't think that these kinds of things, just automatically occur for people. And so I've been, been very blessed in terms of what I've been able to experience in my life.
The Supply Chain Doctor interviews thought leaders and visionaries who have had an impact on the field of supply chain management, shares professional development concepts for practitioners, and investigates current and future trends in the industry. Interested in sponsoring this show to help you get your message out? Send a note to chris@thescdr.com. We can also help with world-class supply chain education and workshops for you and your team. Thanks for listening.